Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and warmly welcome here to SNS. My name is David Sundström, and I'm a research director here at SNS. Today we're going to talk about large-scale infrastructure projects and cost overruns. So a mega project is often defined to cost or have an initial budget larger than $1 billion US. That is more than 9 miljoner kronor. 9 miljarder kronor, I'm sorry. Okay, so performance data for these kinds of mega projects speak their own language. 9 out of 10 are associated to cost overruns. So 90% of these mega projects are more expensive than what was planned to be. So, for instance, the Suez Canal was cost overrun by 1,900%, and the Opera House in Sydney by 1,400%, according to the Danish economic geographer Bent Flyberg. And he established the iron law of mega projects is that they are over budget, over time, over and over again. So this is very important because measured by value, I mean, these kinds of projects have a larger and larger share of global GDP over time, now amounting to like 4%. And the infrastructure projects are also increasing in, this population of mega projects. On the other hand, economist Albert Hirschman said that in his hiding hand principle that people don't seek out challenges. So if we would know at the outset the price and the complexity of these projects, nothing would ever get built, on the other hand. So that these kinds of things, the complexity kind of drives out, the problems drives out creativity in the people. Okay, so today to discuss these issues with us, we have a panel here consisting of, in order of appearance here, Giancarlo Spagnolo. He's a professor at Stockholm Institute of Transition Economics at the Stockholm School of Economics. We have Fredrik Brunes over there, lecturer at the Building and Real Estate Department at the Royal Institute of Technology. Inger Ek, Director General at the National Agency for Public Procurement, Upphandlingsmyndigheten. And also Magnus Bergendal, he's head of markets and strategy within building at Peab. So, civil engineering, sorry. Okay. So Giancarlo will talk by giving us some information from the researcher's perspective here. So, Giancarlo.
Thank you very much. Actually, I interpret this as an occasion to give an overview of possible areas where public procurement could actually be improved in this country, apart from including large mega project. Okay, so I'm here because I met David when I gave a talk on the Karolinska so-called debate at the National Ekonomiska Förening 4 months ago, and so I start from that. Although I know that somebody will not be happy about this. So there's been a big debate about the Karolinska Hospital, alleged problems of possible cost overrun, the issue of lack of competition, only one bid, 2 bids. There are doctors complaining about design flaws and things like that. These are all alleged problems. There are committees discussing this and so on. I will focus on this idea that there may be cost overruns and about the fact that it was used a PPP model and about who used that to end up towards the most important issue, I think, for public procurement in Sweden, actually linked also to privatization, how privatization was done in Sweden. So let me talk about this issue. Let me give you a couple of other examples of large project with cost overrun, like the big deal in Boston that went up from 15 to 22 billion from the estimated 2.8 billion before. There was a PPP. The famous German even the Germans are usually timely, they are lagging behind 10 years. They have a multi-billion of cost overrun. The Aurora Hospital project in Denver and Colorado, they went up 6 times in price. It was not a PPP. It was standard procurement. So it's not all linked to PPP. This is my favorite example about Italy. This is the highway that goes between Naples and Reggio Calabria. It was built first in the 60s. It was completed, so-called, in brackets, in 74 at a cost of 5.6 million per kilometer. But it was very narrow. There was no emergency line. So in 2003, it had to be redone because it was poorly designed. So at the end, it costed 20 to 21 million per kilometer, while the main highway between Rome and Milan it costed 4 million per kilometer. So what do we understand from this? Simple takeaways. First, that if there are cost overrun, that's a standard case. Okay, it's not law; they are common. It's construction business. You may have, cost overrun have been demonized by what happened in South America in the 80s and the 70s, in which cost overrun were used to favor some firms. So some firms were let improve increase their budget ex post for favoritism. But cost overrun, as everybody knows, is intrinsic to all complex and uncertain projects, because you may end up finding new information. When you find new information, you may want to change your initial decision, to improve your decision, and this typically can change the costs. It's not just PPPs. Cost overrun occurs in all type of contracts, in construction in particular. But if there is a cost overrun problem at Karolinska, it's relatively mild compared to what we've seen before. But we are just at the beginning, so we don't know what's going to happen in the next 30 years. These are long contracts. Yeah, I know that the delivery is fixed price, but the service, the adaptation costs is a big issue. And I think there was an issue on how it was designed, the contract, because this contract was thought as something that you could then adapt in the future. But then the fees that were introduced in the contract, they were very high for adaptations. There was an inconsistency in contract design, which in my view was linked by the lack of preparation of the people that in the public sector run this project. But that's my view. So why so? It's complicated, okay? Public procurement is complicated. And let me tell you about a bit in general about the story. When we think about provision of public service, we could think actually of doing things in-house. And Sweden has an whole history of national firms, public firms doing stuff. And you can think about public provision of school, of hospital, and so on. In-house provision as having a Bernardiner dog guarding your house. No? So what happens? Bernardiner is if you have a Bernardiner that guards your house, it will be kind of effective. It will bark if somebody enters, but it's not terribly effective, not very scary, and tends to be a little fat, tends to be a bit slow, and tends to grow too big. Okay, so that's when big public firms. So there's been big shift in Sweden, a bit from that towards outsourcing to private firms and private procurement, and it's like getting Dobermans instead of the Bernardiners to guard your house. Huh? If you get Dobermans competing, think about public procurement with competitive tenders, and Dobermans are the private firms. Competition should make, if there is competition, by the way, competition makes them fast and lean and hungry, so tendentially more effective and scary. So, but they're also dangerous if you don't manage them well, and they may turn against you, and they may collude if you. So you need to be better trained to manage, competing Dobermans than to manage Bernardino, right? A PPP, you can think as having a tiger to guard your garden, because it's a much bigger project, much bigger firms, lots of complication in the contract and so on. And, tigers are potentially very effective, but they tend to be lonely animals. And if you see PPP are typically very non-competitive. It's very difficult to find competitive PPP because the transaction cost of building the coalition between the operation and the building and the financial sector. And without a very good training, very special skill and tools, you will be eaten up by the tiger. Okay? So if you want to run PPP, you need tiger tamers, not local politicians. Okay? Local politicians cannot run PPP. And in countries where they do run PPP, they have very advanced and skilled technical units that have total control on that, which you don't have in Sweden. And that's, I think, problem number one. Let me now go back to the general situation. How much time do I have, by the way? Is anybody thinking? How much time do I have? 10 minutes. Okay, good. So let me talk about more general procurement. Now we're talking about, this is infrastructure procurement, big issues, but this is a general story of procurement. Procurement has been developing fast in terms of as a skill in the last 30 years, 40 years. It used to be considered the most stupid activity in firms because, the issue is to sell. Once you sell, that's difficult. The easy thing is to procure because you have the money, people run to you, and so on. Things changed. Toyota conquered the world thanks to its procurement strategies, and also the public sector changed a lot. In the US, there was a big revolution in the 90s in terms of steering public procurement towards more private sector techniques and data collections and past performance evaluation. In Europe, we had the directives. They were trying to create integrated markets for public procurement in Europe, and these were rules because you want to integrate, you need to have the same way of doing procurement, and this changed a lot in the opposite direction of what the US did. The US was going away from rules, and while Europe went into the rules because they wanted to homogenize the market. And the most recent trend is the fact that public procurement has been recognized as a main driver of innovation in the US, and that the European authorities realized that public procurement can be used for achieving other goals, other policy goals like green, sustainability, environmental policy, social inclusion, innovation, without spending money in other ways. So there are a lot of changes in this function. It has become a strategic function. It is complicated. I can say, apart from being an academic, I've been for 4 years at public procurement. I've been hired when I was teaching in Mannheim. I was working on collusion and corruption. They hired me in Italy when they centralized public procurement. Italy's been one of the biggest, first country in Europe to centralize public procurement, create a unit. It's called CONSIP. It's a central purchasing agency that buys for the public administration for something like 3 to 4 point of GDP, public goods, and I've been working there for 4 years as a head of research and development of the procurement methods. And I can tell you public procurement is really much more complicated than private procurement. Because in addition to the challenge you have in private procurement, you have a lot of restriction links to regulation because of accountability reason, fear of corruption and so on. That makes your life very complicated. You have the threat of the appeal to the judges, and then the decision of judges are very random because judges don't have the competence, don't have sufficient competence to understand the complication of a well-designed procurement. So you need good demand and market analysis, you need expertise in tendering and contract design, auction design, scoring rules, shaping, optimal design of contracts and so on. And then you need effective implementation, contract management, ex-post evaluation. So contracting authorities should have expertise in legal, engineering, economic, strategic, market design, and marketing skills. And these teams should work together in a coordinated fashion to run the phases of the public procurement. Now, to do that, you need a professionalized labor force, and the U.S. started a big action in the 70s to create masters in procurement, a career path for a different level of procurers. There are a lot of different degrees of specialization you can have in public procurement in U.S. What happened in Europe? Well, there is a nice report by a colleague of mine, associé Jean-Tirole, the Nobel Prize a few years ago, on France. 61% in France, for example, 61% of French public buyers arrived at the function of procurers from internal mobility with no prior experience in the field, and only 39% of public buyers undertook some specific training. So most of the others are generic civil servant with none of the skills and none of the advanced skills that a good procurement would require. In Italy, it was a very similar situation before we centralized public procurement. When we centralized public procurement, we realized the damage you can do when you do things wrong. And it's not about corruption, it's talking about quality and wrong scoring rule, misselection of firms, and so on. And since then, there are at least 4 masters in public procurement running in Italy. One is in Tor Vergata, where I'm professor as well, part-time. And this has been now a model that's been spreading in Europe through EBRD. Just a piece of research that we just did with some colleagues of mine. We look at the US, which is considered one of the most skilled procurement force in the world, because they started first to create masters in procurement and career path for procurers and so on. We took a bunch of database from the US, which are freely available, the procurement database, and then a database on organizational skills, and then the federal database on public employees. And we use them to try to identify the effects of the competence of procurement offices on the outcomes. And what we find is that one standard deviation in improvement in competence of the purchasing body determines a 0.4 standard deviation improving in performance. In simple numbers, if all the purchasing agencies in the US, if the competence of all the purchasing bureaus in the US would be brought up at the same level as the top 10%, which is more or less the NASA level, they would save $100,000 per contract in cost of run and 54 days per contract in delay. In numbers, they would save 13.5 billion per year of cost overruns and 7.2 million delay in totals in terms of reduced delays. This would be if the US would improve the labor force as they could. And they have been working on that for 71 to 50 years, okay? So after 50 years of investment into skilled labor force, in the US, you still have this kind of improvements you could achieve. Now, think about Europe. Think about Sweden. I don't think I've seen much of a master in procurement in Sweden. My interpretation is that Sweden used to have very flexible rules for public procurement in the past, and so informal management of tenders was kind of one way that actually helped public procurement to perform decently. The possibility, the discretion that the state had in saying, no, I'm not dealing with you anymore. I wasn't happy with you. I want to do something to somebody else. Before the European directives helped Sweden use more business-like, private business-like techniques in public sector. But now there are the European directives. With the European directive, you cannot use anymore the informal mechanism you use in private sector. And you need to do proper tenders, proper scoring rule, proper auctions, and so on. And there you need skills that are not terribly developed as far as I know, in Sweden. So I think you need to invest more in training your procurers if you want to improve outcomes. And it is not enough. It's not enough to start masters in procurement, as it has happened in several countries in Europe. You also want to create a career path for public procurer. So a public procurer would invest in knowledge and improve his skills. Also, if he knows that it will be recognized. Okay, and public procurement is not, as I mentioned in the past, was not considered a very central core function. So what we need to do is to create a career path that rewards those that succeed and do well. But again, to reward people that succeed and do well, you must monitor them, and so you need data. And if and Sweden is a country that has fantastic data on individual level. Half of the world does research with Swedish data on labor economics because they have individual data which are so detailed that you can know anything on everybody. But when you look at data on public procurement and confirms, it's the worst data in the world, which is where the control should be, which is really amazing. I was surprised when I wrote a report for KKV a couple of years ago about the lack of data on this. So how do you reward somebody? There are people in standard saying management sciences, you cannot manage what you cannot measure, and you cannot improve what you cannot measure. So you need to spend a little resources in improving data collection, procurement. There is very little there. It's mostly collected by private firms. So Konkurrensverket, when it was supposed to monitor the public procurement, had to buy the data from a private firm that had a monopoly, which is kind of paradox because the monopoly, Konkurrensverket was supposed to go after monopolies, but they had to buy from monopolies the data to understand what was going on in public procurement. So you really need much better data to be able to reward success and to identify areas of problems. And so these, I think, my two main points. I think you need to invest more in skills and procurement, and you need to invest more in data. Just two examples of what you can do if you have data. So this is about Italy. Italy is one of the country in Europe that has better data because we have this idea that corruption is everywhere. So everybody is there after corruption. We have a huge anti-corruption agency. So we have a lot of data. So one thing that we could do with this data is to try to identify the amount of waste thanks to the centralization of procurement. So there was a study published in the year 2009 by 3 colleagues of mine. By the way, they had to steal the data. And I was at the time I was the head of research of the Central Procurement Agency. So I helped my friend Tommaso Valletti to steal the data. Actually, I gave him the data. Then they wrote the study, and then they asked the ministry, "Can we publish a study, given that we have the data anyway?" And then they said yes. So what they found that in Italy, again, if you could bring up the quality of tenders in terms of outcome and prices of the all administration on the same level as those of the top 10, you would save between 1.6 and 2.1 of GDP per year. This is a very large number. They also found that actually more autonomous bodies, those with more flexible rules, they do better procurement, and they don't have more corruption. And they're also able to identify how much of the waste is due to corruption, active waste, as they call them, and how much of the waste is due to incompetence or red tape and so on. And they find that in Italy, which is widely considered a relatively corrupt country, at least by Italians, and they perceive it, passive waste, like bureaucratic incompetence and red tape, is responsible for between 83 and 85% of the waste. And only 15-17% is an issue of corruption. So investing in competence is much more important, even in Italy, than investing in anti-corruption and so on. And the last thing I will show you from a project of mine of what you can do with data. So these figures are from a consulting project I had with a large firm in Italy to build a past performance systems that links the quality of the past works to the chance to be again selected as a buyer. So this is just to have an idea. This is the timeline. This is what happened in 2007. There was a firm that wanted to a big firm, Italian firm that run electricity supply and water in central Italy. They wanted to improve quality, and they started to audit workplace. And then they wanted to use these audits to reward the suppliers that perform better with a bonus in the next tender. Okay? But they didn't know how to do it. So they called me and my colleagues that we just finished to work on this issue for concept. And so we actually started to collect data here on the quality of contracts. And then here we announced to all suppliers that we plan to use this as a selection criteria in future auctions as a score. And the idea was to have a 20% weight, 25% weight on past performance indicators, and the rest on the standard quality and price indicators. And there was some meeting with suppliers here and here to convince them that we would really go on. And then here, actually, the first scoring rule started to be run. You know what the scoring rule is. It's the rule that allocates the project to the winner. And usually it's composed of a price, so the lowest price is better than the higher price, quality dimension, higher quality gives me more point than lower quality. And what we added here is the past performance, so an indicator of how good was the work done in the past. And what we got is that the levels of quality and safety at work, that initially was about this level, went up this way. This was safety, and this was quality. This in the long run, this is when we started working on with the past performance data. We created a past performance indicator. It was actually a moving average of the quality in the audits the year before the tender, and they would move in time with the tender. And once firms agreed to be part of this vendor rating system, quality jumped up there and stayed like that until now. And we're happy very now to see that it stayed. This was a permanent change. So using data, even in private procurement, is very important. You can do these things if you have the data. If you don't have the data, you don't know what's going to happen, and it's very hard for firms themselves to know how to improve their performance for the state. So my two, I stop here. My two issues are skills and data. Without them, we don't improve. Thank you. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Giancarlo. More data and more skills on the procuring side. So do you have any questions in the audience here? We have a microphone over here. If you could present yourself, that would be great.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Camilla Fredman Svensson. I come from Skanska. And thank you for this interesting presentation. And it is very difficult doing procurement, as you are stating here, and also you're explaining why it's very difficult. But I'm very interested to know why you choose PPP as in the way you do, because as for example, you use Brandenburg Airport. That's not a PPP project. It's a very good example of a procurement that has gone terribly wrong. I think that if that would have been a PPP project, it would have been done by now. But also NKS is used here, the Nya Karolinska Hospital in Stockholm, as an example of a cost overrun, and that is not true. And that is the whole thing with the PPP. That's often why the customers, they choose this method, because it's a fixed price, and it's the contractor who takes the risk.
Okay, the reason why I think PPP is a nice example is the PPP is a more complex contract than the standard procurement contract. There are financial issues, there are operating issues, and there are building issues together. the complexity. I mean, I remember I read somewhere that the cost of the drafting of the contract for the PPP of the London Metro, which went bankrupt afterwards, was a disaster. The cost of that was 500 million pounds just for writing the contracts. So PricewaterhouseCoopers, is a specialist in writing this contract, but they work a lot for the private sector, and they have a long-term relation for the private sector. This means that the public sector, when it runs these PPPs, faces a bunch of very, very well-skilled and well-endowed and well-knowledgeable people on the side of the private, and it has to deal with a very complicated issue. And competition doesn't help. Why? Because to create a PPP, there are a lot of transaction costs in creating the coalition between the financing firm, the building firm, and the operation firm. These restrict competition. If I know that there are two coalitions already running for a project, I think 100 times when I have to spend all the money to create a third coalition. So competition doesn't actually help as in standard procurement. So you have a very complex transaction. Competition doesn't help you. You have very skilled the tiger in front of you. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying if you want to do it, you have to have the right competence on the public side, which you don't have, in my view, in Sweden at the moment. I'm not saying don't do it. If you can do it, but you have to raise and train tiger tamers to do it well. Okay, then maybe things can work out very well. I think at the end things can work out very well, but it may also work out poorly. Britain just decided to stop using PFI. And after 30 years of experience, private financing initiative was about PPPs. The government just a few months ago said we will stop PFI2. It's not clear what type of model they will use in the future. I don't think the report they are basing their decision is the most sophisticated report you can have. I would suggest to look at research instead of looking at those public reports. Academic research, there is a lot on. But the issues are these one. Complexity made the tiger can be a very, very effective thing, as you said. Things may go very fast, but you need a public sector that has the skill to make sure that these things is a real partnership and not something different. And the tiger should not eat up the public buyer. That's my point.
Okay, thank you. Lars Taxén, Linköping Universitet.
Yes, can you say a little bit more about how you think that procurement is related to project failures? Is that the root cause, you think, of project failures? Or what about complexity? How are these related?
Project failures, how do you intend project failure? Like incomplete?
Cost overrun, time overrun, projects not meeting their goals, like the Berlin airdrome, for example. What is the role of procurement in these gigantic failures or overruns?
In many of these gigantic failures, there is politics involved. So, what do we mean? The word procurement usually is we intend a competitive provision from private.
If we had better provisioning methods, would that make projects more time ready in time, or more meeting their goals, or the quality?
I'm convinced that the quality of the people, the design tender, manage contracts, will improve in this dimension. Okay. That said, if politics is involved too much, then the quality of public procurement will never be good enough. Procurement will be overruled. So I think in many of these projects you see, there is a lot of politics into it, and politics, can do what it wants. So I think the one way you want to do is to try to separate this kind of project from politics. You can have the decision to build the airport, but then you have to delegate to technical unit the running of the procurement, and you should not intervene. And I think, and then having a skilled procurement is the way to improve in these dimensions.
Okay, thank you. So the time has come for Fredrik Brunes to talk more about this.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, hello. I'm very humbled to be here with a giant like Giancarlo who knows this very good. I'm just a doctor. But I will tell you my background and how I look at this is that I work at KTH then, and education is what I think is very important. So just, in Sweden, everybody talks about the value of their villa or the condominium, etc. And people should know the value. How many books are there on the market where you can learn about that kind of stuff? One book, because I wrote it 1 year ago. So that is my feel. I was very surprised. Why aren't there any book on that? So when David invited me, then I felt maybe I can say something. And and now I'm trying to write a book about cost-benefit analysis, samhällsekonomiska investeringsbedömningar, which is of course very important when you construct a new not town, but part of a town. So and I see this as a way of meeting people, and so if you're interested in that, please contact me. Okay, and then I wrote 2 years ago. I wrote my thesis. My doctoral thesis was actually on cost overruns, and I worked at the building and real estate economics at KTH. So, are there systematic cost overruns? Just to state what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. I mean, you can have cost overruns sometimes, and sometimes you go under the budget, so to speak. Then I mean, it's stochastically sometimes. But what we are afraid of is if it's like this, that we're systematically doing cost overruns. And excuse me for my English. I now realize that I slept a lot during high school. So, okay, so that is what we're looking at, systematically. So are there systematic cost overruns? And as David said, and there will be a little bit repetition now from what Giancarlo said, but I mean, then you learn at least. So this Bent Flybjerg, who has done research when it comes to large infrastructure projects, look, he's written a very good book, and especially one article is very interesting when he goes through 180, I think, no, it says there somewhere, well, 250 large mega infrastructure projects in Western Europe and USA, and he finds that, I mean, the cost overruns is like in 90% of the project, and the cost overruns is 40% of the budget and so on. And then he also writes about, that is one problem. Next problem is that the demand is overestimated. So not even that the cost runs are over. Then you build a bridge. It costs more than you suspected, and then less uses it than you suspect. So it's so yeah. Look at his and of course when I wrote my thesis, I sort of borrowed a lot from him. So there are systematic cost overruns. Why? And then I'm referring to this Bent Flybjerg, and in my thesis I could sort of agree with him. Psychological factors. It's called, if you know Kahneman, behavioral economics, there's a term called optimism bias. That, okay, I have this project and I love it so much, so it must be good. It can't be this kind of high cost and low demand for it. One explanation. Another explanation is strategic behavior. That you have planners or politicians, well, maybe not lying, but maybe sort of, what's the word in skarva? With the figures, they sort of, I think you understand. Not lying, but wanting it to be, to get the project approved. I think is there anyone here from the Trafikverket, Transport Administration? I think it's called nyckelhålsfenomenet, to get it through the keyhole. So you sort of lie about, and then you get the project through, and then, look, the cost was like this high. And technical problems. you run into Hallandsås. So this was from Bent Flyberg and the research I looked there. What can be done then to prevent it? And as Giancarlo was, I interpreted the same thing as I'm actually saying here. It's transparency. That you very often you should show these are the costs, and you should often have someone to review it. And if it's sort of Förbifart Stockholm, maybe you should have international people coming over and look at the figures. Is this correct, sort of, and have peer review as we have within research. So more transparency and more. Actually, the Danish researcher he wants people who calculate bad. They should be fired. That is what he says. So there should be some kind of consequence if you really, So that was transparency. Reference class forecasting, which I interpreted a little bit from Giancarlo's presentation, the need for data, because that is to prevent this optimism bias. I love this project. Oh, I have no data what it costs, but now there's data. That's called reference class forecast. Oh, look, it costs that much or that much or that much. Then you will probably... Let me take just one anecdotal evidence. I have a friend. He works at a large real estate company, and he do sort of construct projects. And he's the only one at that company, who afterwards the project is done, goes through the calculation and see what did it cost compared to budget. So, and that was not research, that was an anecdotal. But that is, if you don't do any kind of look what the cost actually ended up at, then you will fall to this optimism bias. I know there's good research on this topic at VTI, Jan-Erik Nilsson and Johan Nyström. They tried to do this kind of research at Trafikverket's projects. Maybe you heard about it 2-3 years ago, where they tried to, for the first difficult thing is, when was the project decided, on what kind of budget? It's difficult. But they found that. But then it was so difficult to follow the project because it was changed all the time. It's called ätor. So they had to cancel the project, the research, because they couldn't see what's now. So Jan-Erik Nilsson was at the Aktuellt Swedish program, and said, yeah, we can't, but our solution is that the road administration, Trafikverket, must have better control of their costs. Okay, my contribution, that was Bent Flyberg, a little bit more. I also came up to, I don't have to say all this, a little bit about Giancarlo, competence. What I did, I sent out this sort of, from a methodology perspective as a researcher, I asked 120 project managers in Sweden at Skanska, Peab, road administration, etc. I asked them, are there cost overruns? Yes, they said. Why? And they stated that there was a lack of competence from the buyer. And so that was one conclusion from that survey. Then me and a friend, we had some kind of, I will not talk, we said that it can actually be rational to suspect cost overruns if the renegotiation cost is zero. If I buy something, I ask David to do something, and I think what he has to do, either 100 hours or 200 hours to do that. And then if I know it doesn't cost me anything to negotiate with him, renegotiate, I just call him and do more, and he doesn't increase the price, then of course I will order him to do 100 hours. And then he do 100 hours, he come back, I'm not finished yet. Then, okay, do some more. So if I then in my budget have 100 hours, then I will expect cost overruns. Yeah. Prevent, the last slide. Yeah, do not have too much trust in technical solution. What did we mean by that? I forgot that. But we have listened here to procurement, etc. We thought of reason about maybe you should have a package of tools. You need to think about how you organize the project with how much private people, PPP, etc. Private contribution can, of course, due to competition, lower the cost. So that was one. Maybe you should look at inside the organization, which I assume a lot of you do. I mean, okay, whip and carrot within the project. So that do you follow me at least?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And the last one is what was the last thing? Yeah, it was this Danish that you should have transparency and peer review, etc. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Fredrik. Do we have any questions from the audience to Fredrik? Everything's clear?
Good.
Okay. Then Inger Ek, you will talk a little bit about the procurement agency's view of this. Show a couple of slides.
Yes, thank you. I'm very obliged to be here in such an audience and a panel, great panel. I'm Inger Ek and I'm from the Swedish National Agency for Public Procurement, and that is Upphandlingsmyndigheten. And we're a young agency in Sweden. And just to present what we are doing, we're not doing any public procurement ourselves. We are just promoting legal certainty, efficiency, and social and environmental sustainability through procurement. And we aim to strengthen the strategic importance of public procurement, just as you were speaking, Giancarlo has spoken about today. And we want to promote innovation and alternative solutions within public procurement. And we do that to safeguard the public and industry progress and benefit from public procurement. So that is the purpose of our agency. Our vision is, in a sort of English, sound public businesses for a sustainable future. And I'm just going to present the scope. In Sweden, the public value of public procurement is about 680 billion Swedish crowns. And one of the largest parts of that is construction works. As you can see, it's about 109 billion. And this figures, as Giancarlo told you, we don't have a lot of data that we control. So this is some estimation in this. And this is, in Sweden, we have a very decentralized system. We have the local municipalities, we have the counties, and we have the state, the government. And within these figures, there's not the public-owned companies. A lot of municipalities has a lot of companies, and that, the figures from that part isn't included in this. But we estimate that part within the public housing about being about 50 billion, at least. So you can see, construction works is a lot of the Swedish public procurement spending. And in general, you can say the Swedish public procurement is about 18% of the Swedish GDP. And that's a rather high amount comparing to the other countries in, for instance, Europe. Those constructions are delivered, you can say, by almost, this is the 20 top suppliers. And there's a lot of, you can see, Peab is here, but a lot of is within Skanska and NCC. So you can see that there's not a lot of competition. It's concentrated to a part of the market. The market is rather concentrated. In Sweden, there's also a national public procurement strategy. And there's a lot of, there's 7 overall objectives that has to be fulfilled by the public procurement. And that is public procurement as a strategic tool for a good deal, effective public procurement, that is, for instance, competence and facts, a diversity of suppliers and effective competition to remain a good market, legal certainty, that is compliance to the rules, the directives, promoting some innovations and alternative solutions, that is to secure that the things you buy has to be aiming for the need of tomorrow. Environmental responsible procurement, that is the green public procurement, and reduce the emissions and so on. And public procurement contributing to a social sustainable society. It's a lot of objectives to fulfill within the public procurement, isn't it? Yes. And we have a lot of different factors that affects the public procurement work contracts. How is the market? Do the requests from the procuring entities and are they available by the suppliers? And I didn't say that 70% of all the public procurement is done by the local municipalities. And that is the part of the organization in Sweden that has the lowest resources for being a buyer. The local municipalities has about 1 or 2, maybe, that are in this sort of role. Is there a boom or recession? Has the procurement entity any demands of innovation? Are we going for a fossil-free building or construction? That is affects if there is going to be a cost overrun, maybe. And in Sweden we have social sustainability in public procurement. And since 1st of June 2017, there is labor law requirements that is mandatory to set the specific labor conditions for performance within the contract in Sweden. So that is maybe contributing to the sum of the costs. And in some cases, we use public procurement as a way to keep people in employment within the contract. That is the people that is maybe target groups that is outside they don't have any jobs. So that is some of the things that can affect how the contract is going. Yes, I agree with a lot of the things that these 2 gentlemen has said before. What we need to is that to be prepared that this time of projects, long-time projects, has you can't foresee everything that is going to happen during the time of fulfillment of the contract. So I think that you need a more agile sort of way of perform within the contract. But the purpose of the contract has to be prepared with a good purpose. And you have the preparation phase has to be done in a more proper way. You have to fulfill the ideas what you need before you do the fulfillment within the procurement process. And afterwards, you have to have enough resources to do the follow-ups and see what if their contract has been fulfilled or not. And in general, in Sweden, we do have some resources for doing the procurement process, which we don't have the resources to prepare the procurement in a good way, and we don't have the resources to do the follow-ups. So I agree in many of the ways that you have presented before.
Okay, thank you, Inger.
Thank you.
Okay, so one of the main suppliers in the construction category that Inger showed us was Peab. Magnus, you work at Peab. Do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, some comments I have. Magnus Bergendal is my name. I've about 30 years in the construction business on the civil side, working as a market and strategy manager, director or something. But anyway, we were talking about budget overall, but compared to what we're talking about, the budget is set out before the procurement start, or cost overall compared to contract, which is a completely different thing. It can be very, very completely different. We haven't discussed about that so much, but because I know that for instance, the Trafikverket do this successive calculation. I don't know the name, successive calculating, which is, I've been in some myself actually for some years ago, quite rough. You estimate into make a budget. And that works out fine when you come to greenfield. You come to railways, you come to roads in the greenfield area and bridges and so on. You often got that quite right. But if you go into the inner city project where a lot of environments and movements and soil reinforcement and whatever, they are more often off the reality, is my opinion. So it's overall compared to budgets is one thing, and overall compared to contract volume is another thing. Because I am the Doberman. We go for the contracts, and most often it's we compete with the price level on the contract. And what we have to do then is to, according to the requirements, get the lowest total price on that one. And sometimes we know that this is the price, but the cost will be a little bit more because there are something that's not in the contract or without the contract, or you can do, because that is what we compete to get the contract in the order book. And when we come to cost overalls, then I would say one thing first is the importance of choosing the right strategy for the procurement of projects in an early stage. If you have a mega project, which we're talking about today, I think the one thing that varies over time is how to divide it into contract to get to attract the market, so to say. If they're only big projects, it's not attractive, not even for us. We like the range of smaller project, mid-sized projects, depending on the competence we have available and the organization we have available. So that's one thing I should send as a message, to get the most out of the supplier market. So then you get more competition and more variation in the competition. And also choosing the right contract form for the actual project. If the project is simple, not so many innovations to do, you can have a performance contract. It's you get more competitors, and you get easy to handle. If you see that there are more things to do for a innovative contractor, you can use the design and build. And if it's extremely complex that you can't even price it in a appropriate way, you can use the ECI model for early contracting involvement then. And we have actually the first one, big one that Trafikverket has in Göteborg, Olskroken, which is extremely complicated. We wouldn't even go there and price it if it would have been a normal contract, so to say. And then when we come to the cost overall or cost change from the contract price to in the end of the day price, you were talking about ETA here. I've actually looked non-scientific research in our economy system with all our projects. We have about a turnover only for Trafikverket for 3-4 billion a year, Swedish crowns. Roughly, and runs about 40-50 projects in parallel of different sizes, from big ones to small ones. So, and I have looked into that, and I've also talked to some of the projects here. What makes the change from the contract value to the end value, which can be some percent, and some can be almost double, and it varies a lot. You can't get any data things out of that, because sometimes you want to buy more. You buy some side roads and some other things that has to be done during the project. And then you have, of course, the deviation and change orders related to technical issues, related to new techniques that changed of some way or another. And some other things. And what I should say by that is that one important thing that if you should do something is to quality assurance of the preliminary design before you do the procurement. That is one of the important things. Sometimes it's very good, and sometimes you see that this isn't a real accurate thing that we will end up in. And also one reflection that I've made in our order books, if we look at the infrastructure part of we have about 12-13 billion SEK in Sweden in civil engineering, and 1/3 of that roughly is Trafikverket or that kind of project then. I've looked at for 3 years behind to look at the profits made, which is an important thing in this for me. And if we look at the overall, if you add everything upon it, it's slightly lower than we have. We are a low profit business, between 2% and 5% always, and the Trafikverket is on the low at the moment. For I should say the last 3 years at the lower part of this one. It's lower than our average, but so it's not a big deal to make change orders. It's a matter of survival sometimes. That the change orders has to be handled, and in the normal way we do it in a very good way with our clients, mostly under the budget. But we have some that we know that the budget is too low when we get the contract. That contract volume is bigger than the budget value.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Magnus, for the insights. All right, so we don't have very much time left, and we will not do a time overrun today. But I will ask one broad question, which may not have any answer, but one which I was thinking about earlier. I mean, in this day and age, when the rate of return is very low, the central bank puts very low interest rates, and pension money wants like returns. So there is the suggestion of moving the money to invest in large-scale infrastructure projects. I mean, the things that we're talking about today, would that have any implication for this? Because, for instance, I wrote an example here somewhere that the Channel Tunnel in London, between UK and France, it had a negative internal rate of return of like minus 15% or something like that. I mean, would this have an influence of the way of thinking about putting pension money into infrastructure projects? What do you say about that? Do you have any?
Yeah, I wouldn't put money into it then, of course, if there's a cost overrun. So
all right.
No. I have no, but could I just state one?
Sure.
Magnus here, I just want to clarify the research that I've looked at, and that was very good said of you. We were not looking at the contract, what was contracted and what the cost was. We were looking at what the budget was, because because I'm a teacher, then this successive method, as you mentioned, is they are using that at Trafikverket now. I know, and they are supposed to do some kind of evaluation of it. I don't know how it has evolved, but and there's a Danish there also, Lichtenberg, who's written this. So if you're interested, look into that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Questions from the audience? Yes, do we have a microphone? Oops. Over here. Thanks. Please present yourself. Thanks.
I'm Dag Björklund. I work at Nacka municipality outside Stockholm. We heard now about the data and measurement and the competence. And Inger and Fredrik, you can say you can represent each one. You're the competence and you're the data. What is done, or what do you have any initiatives, or is there anything ongoing on those areas in Sweden?
Actually, I think Giancarlo can answer the competence, because I'm not that skilled in when it comes to managing projects, so to speak. But to increase the competence, in my point of view, is, I come back to my books all the time, but I'm writing this cost-benefit analysis. If you're supposed to build, and the Vägverket is using this a lot in their projects. If you're supposed to build something, then you do this cost-benefit analysis, and you and I think and you need competence to do that. I think for municipalities to construct Nacka, where you're supposed to construct a lot, if you build this new neighborhood, you should have competence to do this kind of cost-benefit analysis, and in that case you also need to have some kind of understanding of the mechanism might be behind the cost overruns.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Inger?
Yes. Within the competence area, I think it's like within the municipalities, you have to cooperate within the sector with the other, not only the public procurers. You have to do internal cooperation to work together, team over. Different functional areas has to work together. But in local municipalities, there's always a lack of resources. So you have to invest in competence. There, I think in the largest projects, for instance in Trafikverket, they have the competence. But during, if you see looking to the whole area in the public procurement and the government's public sector, there's a lack of competence and resources in the municipalities. So, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a master in public procurement. I agree, but you have to work together, and you can't. All that you demand in a public procurer, there's not. I don't think it's possible to fulfill all those demands or requirements.
Okay, thank you. We had one more question over here, which will be the last question for today.
My name is Staffan Håkansson. I've been in the transportation sector for about 30 years. It's good to hear about the experience from projects who went bad with lots of overruns in cost and time. But there are also a number of big projects who have been managed well and ready before time and at lower cost than planned. I think one of the most famous one is Öresund's bridge. And what can we learn from those projects? I think it's as least important than to learn why some projects went wrong. I think it's about management very much, how they are organized, incentive programs, for instance, for the contractors and so on. So don't forget to look on the good projects. There are a number of them.
Yes. Fredrik, you showed your picture there. First picture about,
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so that's a kind of positive last statement then. Inger, do you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to add, there's a work within the government according to data. We don't have the statistics in Sweden within, just as Giancarlo said, but they're preparing some new legislation in public procurement data. So.
Okay, thank you.
May I propose something? We're starting on KTH. Why don't you team together to start thinking about a short master? Sorry.
No,
just to be proposed. Not to be only critical. You are together. You can talk together. Why don't you think about running a master in procurement? Because it's good to have the book. It's good to have the teaming up, but you need to give incentives to administrations to. So one thing we're doing in Italy, for example, we are rating contracting authorities with their competence and introducing legislation that will not allow a contracting authority that doesn't have the skills necessary to run complex projects. There will be a rating of buyers, and only those that have people with enough people with a master in engineering, enough people with a master in procurement, they can run a bridge, and they'll probably do it well, as in that case. And then this will create a kind of movement in terms of better acquisition. But another thing you can do is centralize a little bit more. If you centralize a little bit more procurement, you have bigger procurement. You can have specialized people. They can invest into learning. So a little bit less. I understand in Sweden people like decentralization, but decentralization means more is beautiful. But if you have more than you run a big project, it's not as beautiful anymore. Some big project needs to be run by central. So that's things that can be done. If you.
Okay, thank you. I've also heard that blockchain, the new technology of blockchain, could help out in these kinds of situations and prevent cost overruns. The 30th of November at 10, I think, here at SNS, we will provide a seminar on blockchain applied to the public sector. And Lantmäteriet will visit us to talk about their blockchain project. We are also starting up a research project starting January on hållbar samhällsbyggnad. If you want to contribute to that project, you can join this group in the reference group, the steering group for the project. Just talk to us afterwards if you're interested in that. It was kind of a short discussion here today. The panel discussion was quite short. There is coffee outside, and we can continue the discussion outside the room. Otherwise, have a nice weekend, and thank you for coming to us. Thanks. And thanks to the panel as well, of course.